So I call this story a live TV dilemma. In the chaotic days right after 9/11, while the world was still reeling from the attacks, I found myself in a TV studio in San Francisco facing a television camera with an earpiece in my ear, waiting for CNBC television to connect me into their live show. Suddenly, I hear the connection start, and the anchor of CNBC says to me, "With us now is Tim Leach, Chief Investment Officer of Wells Fargo Bank. Tim, we understand that you would like to clarify what the bank's chief economist meant when he was interviewed on our show earlier today, anticipating that the likely outcome of the attacks of 9/11 would cause a global recession." How the heck did I get into this? Earlier that day, the CEO's office of Wells Fargo called me and said that the chief economist for Wells Fargo had been on CNBC and had made this statement, and that this statement was likely to go viral. And they told me, and asked me, they told me that I was going to be force placed onto CNBC live television that afternoon in order to explain, in order to clarify what our chief economist meant, that would somehow avoid the bad headlines the next morning. Yikes. So I headed over to the Uplink studio in the financial district for this interview with some intrepidation, in part because I was in San Francisco. I would be a remote guest on a New York-based television show. And just to color that in, what that means is that as a remote guest, you would sit by yourself in a studio facing a large TV camera, big fisheye lens, but you wouldn't have any screen that would show you the people, the anchor that you're supposed to be or that you're talking with, because of the 5-second delay that CNBC imposes on live television. And so you have nothing visually. All you have is you have an earpiece in your ear. That's your only connection, is the verbal through that connection. And as such, when you have any interview, you would have then the challenge of listening very carefully to the questions the anchor is asking you, and then formulating questions in a very concise fashion, because live television is a sound-based environment, and when you're, though, trying to address complex topics like the definition of a recession and what it might mean and all that, is really, really hard in a soundbite fashion. However, that's just part of the game. And if you're going to be an effective television guest on live television, remote, you need to have the facial expressions, the hand gestures, as if you were sitting right in the New York studio across the table from the anchor, having a conversation, and yet you're in a room by yourself. And so you have to be a bit of an actor, right, in doing that. And so that adds to the overall apprehension. So I'm heading over to the studio that has the technology, the uplink technology, to connect into New York, which happened to be at the Wall Street Journal offices in the financial district in San Francisco. Wells Fargo had a contract with them to be able to use their studio for these purposes. I'd used their studio before, and I'm using air quotes when I use the word studio because the Wall Street Journal's studio was about the size of a walk-in closet. Maybe a small storage room, like 6 feet square. And in the middle of this room was a wooden bar stool. And there was a television camera bolted on the wall facing the bar stool. And as a backdrop, right behind the guest, there was a large poster, a photograph, old, faded, kind of curled on the edges of the iconic Transamerica building, the pyramid-shaped building, so that television viewers watching the show would get a sense of where that guest was speaking from. Everybody would identify that. Now, that was the Wall Street Journal kind of physical space. But the first time that I went there to do a TV interview, I was greeted as normal by the Wall Street Journal tech who would get me into the room and would give me the earpiece. But that first time, this tech told me that there was this oddity relative to their TV camera equipment, that instead of looking right at the fisheye lens like I am now, that would give the viewing public the sense that the speaker is looking right at the audience, the technology of the camera was such that one needed to look about 6 inches above the camera and about 6 inches over to the right. Why? Why didn't they fix it? I couldn't tell you. Anyhow, that's what it was. And this oh so helpful tech, in order to give us guests a target where to look, he used a purple Post-it and he stuck it on the wall to be a target for us to look at and to help remind us what it was for, that this is where we were to look. He hand drew with a pen an eyeball on the Post-it with eyelashes. No problem. So here you are, right, as a guest, and you're trying to deal with all of those issues of listening to the anchor's question, formulating soundbite questions, and putting and answers, but putting out of your mind that you know the fact that the daytime business day audience of CNBC television was about 200,000 people. Just ignore that. And in my case, in this instance, ignore the fact that your CEO's office is also watching to make sure that you're keeping Wells Fargo Bank out of the headlines. What's to worry? Well, I didn't realize that the universe actually intended a much bigger challenge for me that day. After the anchor made their opening kind of statement and kind of laid it out for me, rather than getting into it right away, I intended to do what I normally do when I get on to a show like this, live television, is to thank the anchor for having me on their show, and then I would get into the substance of what I was going to say. So I started on my thank you, and I started thank you for, and I knew I was in horrible trouble already, because every word that I said a fraction of a second later came bouncing right back into my earpiece in this horrible echo. And it was just so jarring. I'd never heard that before, certainly not on live television. I stumbled through literally my thank you. And then I just stopped and I stared because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so the anchor certainly wasn't going to let me off. and he couldn't know that I was having severe feedback issues. So the anchor just doubled down. So, Tim, what did your chief economist mean? I couldn't think of anything else to do other than just steel myself and march forward. And so with the information in a soundbite fashion about how recessions can either be more of just a slowdown, which is what our chief economist meant, versus a big depression, which is what the headlines would infer. I started talking, and every word is coming right back at me, and it was so distracting. I had to use every ounce of my focus to focus just on my mouth and the words that were coming out of my mouth, and I had to put up a mental wall to shield from anything coming into my ear in order to get it through. And I just marched my way through, and I can only imagine what the viewers that day thought. I must have looked very stiff and very grim, because that's frankly how I felt. I was just getting this done, and what I got done, the anchor, he was ready to move on. I was force placed onto his show anyway, and it was just an accommodation. And so he's like, "Thank you, Tim," and now we're going to talk about it, and I'm cut off. Thank God, I was so relieved, but I just wanted to put it behind me. I didn't review the tape later or anything else. I don't even want to look. When I got back to my office, I thought it was interesting that I didn't get a call from the CEO's office, good or bad, got nothing. But whatever I did, whatever I said, it must have been effective enough to keep Wells Fargo out of the bad headlines the next day. Otherwise, I would have heard about it. This experience taught me how devastatingly distracting an internal monologue can be. Ignore it. Thank you very much.